Welcome back to BestGuessistan. This is the place where we examine rupture, that thing that splits your life into before and after, and what those ruptures reveal about systems failures and some of the surprising ways to repair and survive on the other side. I'm Wendy Lurie, and today we'll be talking about a rupture that millions navigate every single day, but that few systems acknowledge or support: caregiving, the life-altering rupture of caregiving. Caregiving is work, often unseen, frequently invisible, but it is work, and it's work that changes your life. It's logistics work, it's identity work, it's emotional work, it's physical work, and often those are all happening at the same time. But society treats caregiving as a footnote, or a favor, or a personal inconvenience, often wrapped in a rosy glow that masks its cost. Caregiving demonstrates every single structural gap we prefer to believe doesn't exist: policies, resources, flexibility, humanity. Caregiving demonstrates which societies were built for humans and which were built for output. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with someone who is living the rupture of caregiving in real time, from the inside out. Today's guest is Wendy Weingart. Wendy is an attorney and a mediator, and someone who was thrust headfirst and headlong into the almost entirely unsupported world of caregiving. She brings precision, clarity, humor, and the kind of truth you only get from someone who has lived the rupture and is still trying to figure out what comes next. She is navigating the infrastructure, and I use the present tense for a reason. This is happening in real time. She is navigating the emotional load. She is navigating the system's failures and the decisions that no one prepares you for. I was very much looking forward to this conversation. And just one personal note: if you hear references to inside jokes, that's not a coincidence. Wendy and I go back. We first met when we were 16 at orientation weekend before our freshman year of college. So we have history. Welcome, Wendy.
I'm so delighted to be here, Wendy. It really is an honor. And yeah, we have some history.
We do. So let's get
Better
started.
or worse.
We'll keep the history to the relevant topic, which today
Right.
is caregiving.
Exactly.
And let's start there. Let's start with naming what we now call the rupture. So what was the moment that caregiving entered your life? Was it sudden? Did it happen slowly? Did you recognize it then for what we would call a rupture now?
So it started in January of 2023, and it came on very suddenly. My husband, we are now married 31 years. My husband had stage 1 colon cancer surgery in August of 2022 and didn't require any post-operative treatment, was doing very well. But in January of 2023, he became violently ill one day. And I came home and he was literally on the bathroom floor. We called EMS. Make a long story short, he had sepsis. His colon had become necrotic, and he had to have emergency colectomy surgery, which is basically where they remove your colon. And he had a permanent ileostomy placed. The recovery from that surgery was long and arduous. And there were a number of complications along the way. They were dealing with the infection and all of that. And that's when my role completely shifted to that of caregiver and learning how to navigate the medical system, the hospital system, how to manage and plan things at home, how to manage and plan things for work. I basically spent every day in the hospital with him. And ultimately, from that surgery, he recovered. He went to short-term rehab. He got stronger and he came home. And there was a long period of adjustment for him and for me. But we weathered that storm. In January of 2024, he had an intrathecal pain pump implanted. That's where they put a reservoir in, and there's a catheter that runs along your spinal column, and it delivers pain medication. And the reason he had that installed was because he's had basically 50 years of intractable back pain, and he's had 2 spinal fusion surgeries, both of which failed. So he was in constant pain. And at this point, this was the last resort. He goes along, and then in July of 2020, and in January of 2025, he started to complain that his legs were weak. He was dropping things. He felt like he didn't have control over things. He started coughing when he was eating and drinking. We went to a neurologist. They evaluated him. They couldn't find anything wrong. They said, you have to do physical therapy to get your stronger, your legs stronger, your core stronger. So he's doing physical therapy. He's doing occupational therapy at home. But it's not helping. He's getting weaker and weaker. And then finally, in July of 2025, and he had a series of falls, I should say. He fell outside several times. He fell in the house several times. And he was so weak that he actually could not get himself up off the floor. And it took 2 of us to get him up. In July of 2025, actually on July 21st, I got a call. I was at my office. I got a call. And from actually our daughter, who was working from home that day, who said, Daddy fell and he can't get up. The occupational therapist was here, was at my house. They got him into a chair, but he had horrible pain in his leg. I get home, we call EMS, we go to the hospital, going through tests. Ultimately, they transfer him to, we were in a local small hospital, and then they transfer him to a large teaching hospital that's part of a large medical institution. It turned out that he had developed cysts on his spinal cord, and he ended up having 9-hour emergency spinal surgery. And the neurosurgeon said that his back looked like, the nerves in his spinal cord looked like, his analogy was wet spaghetti that had not been sitting in water. And he literally had to tease apart the nerves. So he's starting to recover from that surgery. And then 5 days after that surgery, I get a call at 7:30 in the morning from a doctor telling me, we have to intubate your husband because he's losing his airway. And at that moment, I knew unequivocally that my whole world had shifted. Everything I knew about anything immediately, to use a Wendy Lurie phrase, ruptured. It just ruptured. My world ruptured. Because I knew that once they intubate somebody, there are a lot of hard decisions to make if they can't get him to breathe on his own again. And then you have to make the decision as to whether or not you're going to extubate that person and let them basically die of natural causes because they can't breathe on their own. So from that moment on, from July, he had his surgery on July 30th. He was discharged from that hospital. He was extubated, and I'll explain why. He was discharged from that hospital on November 13th. So he spent from July 21st to November 13th in the hospital. And I went to that hospital. I sat at his bedside every day, talking to doctors, getting nurses, trying to figure out what was going on, trying to understand the, a diagnosis, a treatment plan, a prognosis. And it was very, very, very difficult to get definitive answers from anybody. All the while, I had the benefit of being able to work remotely from the hospital rather than having to go to the office. And simply by the grace of my CEO, who generously allowed me to do that, and learning how to deal with this person who, again, was nowhere near the person that I was married to 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Everything shifted.
Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
Because I would love to hear more. Like, everything shifted at once, right? You went through this experience. How did it feel? First of all, what shifted? Was it your sense of identity, your schedule, your emotional ability? Did everything shift at once? What did this feel like?
For a long time, I felt numb. I didn't feel anything. I just moved. I just put one foot in front of the other. I was not sleeping well, obviously, but I was getting up every day, going to the hospital. I was desperately trying to bring some sense of order to what felt like complete disorder. And it was very hard. It's still hard because, he's in rehab now, and, it's going to be a very long and arduous journey again to recover from this surgery.
Well,
And
and I think it's interesting to think about, because caregiving is not one moment in time, right? I mean, it happens in phases. And what you've been going through feels like the most acute phase.
right,
He's in rehab now, which feels like a slightly further out phase, but there's also going to be a chronic piece of this,
correct.
which I will want to have you back to talk about another time. But I want to make sure everyone knows that we're focusing on this is really the acute, this particular time. And what was going on while this was happening? What were you doing that people didn't see?
Well, well, in 2023, I realized that I was going to have our master bathroom renovated to make it handicap accessible, because I wasn't sure if he was going to be able to walk again, or at least be able to walk when he got home. So while he's in the hospital going through all these medical issues and crises, I'm talking to contractors and running to pick out tile for the new shower floor. I've got workmen in my house. I'm displaced from my bedroom. Um, and I'm trying to manage all of this. Plus, at that time, our daughter was in a master's program overseas, so I'm managing that as well, trying to keep her, the most difficult phone call I had to make was when I had to call her and tell her that her father was going in for emergency surgery, and I wasn't sure if he was going to survive the surgery. And I had to bring her home from overseas on less than 24 hours notice.
And you're dealing with this alone, basically.
I'm dealing with this other than friends who were constantly calling and checking in, and I'm dealing with this alone.
Right.
But and as much as I have a very good close circle of friends, you among them, one of the challenges is that people try to be helpful. They try to say, how are you? What's going on? And so all I'm doing, well, all I feel like I'm doing is reporting out, giving a status. And it's hard for me, just based on my own sort of, I think, personality, to sit there and say, I need help. I'm broken. I'm done. I'm spent. I have no more energy for any of this. And I think that was sort of recognizing that was a critical path for me, because I realized that I had to pull back a little bit. As you know, I'm very blessed because my mother is still alive, and she's turning 101 in 2 weeks. But every day was she was calling me and saying, I'm so worried about you. I'm so worried about you. And I had to say to her, this is not helpful. This is not helpful. And she finally got the message, actually with the assistance of my sister.
It takes a village.
Right. And she stopped asking me that. She stopped telling me that. I'm so worried about you. Because then I'm spending energy assuaging her concerns, right?
Right.
Addressing her needs when I can't even address my own needs.
Right.
So that was sort of the long answer to the short question.
No, it needs the question could be short, but that answer needed to be long. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the cost of caregiving, right? Because there's a financial cost, there's an emotional cost.
Yes.
I have a few data points on the financial cost, which are kind of stunning to people who have not been in this world. But according to AARP, the unpaid caregiving industry is over $600 billion, which in the US yearly, which makes it larger than tech.
Billion with a B?
With a B. And that most caregivers spend just over a quarter of their annual income on caregiving because the resources aren't available.
Without a doubt.
Macro and micro, it's huge. And the system relies on caregivers, but it just doesn't support them.
Correct. I've in both situations, both in 23 and this past year, I felt like I was hemorrhaging cash constantly. And with this past hospitalization, my husband was on Medicare. So it was a little bit different, but nevertheless, there are a lot of things that Medicare or your Medigap insurance doesn't cover. So you have to pay out of pocket. For example, now that he's in rehab, if he has to go outside to see a doctor's appointment, he requires transportation, wheelchair accessible transportation. I pay for that out of pocket every time. Nobody's paying me back. I can't get that money back from anybody.
No.
Right? It's it's astounding how much money you end up spending to accommodate all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Renovating my bathroom. I mean, I had no choice. I had to take a bathtub out because he wasn't going to be able to navigate that,
Of course.
right?
Of course.
Not renovating my bathroom was not on my agenda for
No.
for
No.
2023.
No. I know.
It was not, you know. So it meant taking a hard look at our finances and all of that. And that was a scary piece of it too,
Sure.
because, all of a sudden your disposable income is not so disposable anymore because it's all accounted for.
Right. Right. So the financial cost obviously is very, very significant, but you talked about it a little before, but let's talk also a little bit about the emotional cost.
Mm, yes.
So what does this do to your identity and your sense of self and who you are in the world and what matters? Like what happens?
Uh, for me personally,
Hmm.
I lost my complete sense of my identity. I was not Wendy Weingart, really. I was Perry's wife. I was um, Perry's caregiver. I was Perry's advocate. I still am Perry's advocate. Um, it it's nothing in this period of time has been about me.
Right.
It's I I don't have the bandwidth to make anything about me at this point because so much of my energy is going into taking care of him, making sure his needs are being met, and working my full-time job,
Right. Right.
which is what pays the bills. It
Yep.
and that is the reality of life. Um, so I can't afford to quit my job.
Right.
So I have to keep working. I have to figure out a way to take conference calls in the hospital room and, edit documents at night. So I would come home from the hospital at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and I'd open up my laptop and I would work till midnight or 1 in the morning because I had no choice.
Right.
So there was a great emotional cost as well as and physical. I was, and I still am to some extent, absolutely exhausted to the bone.
Understandably. I want to get into the sort of day to day of this, but I'd love you to talk about what it was like in the hospital with this, you were dealing with all of these professionals, all of these providers, and how that went, what that
Um,
was like.
so that was a very interesting experience and eye opening and very educational. Um, I will say what I always say to the doctors and the nurses when I'm talking to them is, I'm not a medical professional, but I'm very knowledgeable because I read a lot and I'm fascinated by medicine, which is true. I have always
That's
been
true.
fascinated by medicine. However, despite saying that, every single doctor that we spoke to, every single PA, every single nurse practitioner would always start in circles. They would start talking in circles. Well, this could be that. Maybe we can try that. There was what ended up happening in the most recent hospitalization is Perry was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called myasthenia gravis, which is actually pretty rare, um, even though there are a lot of medications being advertised on TV for it. Uh, and it affects your muscles because it affects the ability of the nerves um, and the muscles to basically communicate with each other. So that was one of the reason why he lost his airway and they had to intubate him, was because he had entered into a myasthenia gravis crisis. That's what it's called. So where he's in the surgical ICU unit, and the neurologist comes to talk to me. They bring in a neurologist. The neurologist says, well, I want to test him for myasthenia gravis or other motor neuron diseases and eliminate that. Okay. So I said, what do you mean other motor neuron diseases? He said, well, other motor neuron diseases. Okay. So he tests him. Turns out he comes back positive for myasthenia gravis, but that takes 2 weeks to get that diagnosis. In the meantime, they started him on the treatment for that, for an acute crisis, in anticipation of to see if he would respond to it. So now we're 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in. I'm sorry. After 2 weeks, the neurologist says to me, I'm rotating off out of this hospital building. I'm going to another hospital that's part of the system. You're going to have Dr. X. He's going to cover for me. Okay, Dr. X comes in. I meet Dr. X. We talk. He clearly has not read the record. Clearly. So I am sitting there downloading all of this information about the removal of the pain pump. Oh, and he tested positive for fungal infection too. So they were treating a fungal infection. So, and I want to say to this guy, did you read his chart? Did you, it's different when you're in an emergency room and every time a professional comes up to you, they always say, what brings you here today? Right? And you want to say, did you read the chart? But here, he's been in the hospital now 3 weeks. There's some information in there that they can rely on. They're treating him. In the meantime, I keep asking, well, what's the prognosis here? And do we have a definitive diagnosis? What's the prognosis? What's the treatment plan? And I talk to neurology, I get one answer. I talk to the attending in the surgical ICU, I get another answer. And I said, well, did you talk to each other? Oh, well, we will talk to each other. The lack of coordination and communication is mind-boggling. And I was finally able to get a handle on things because I was introduced to a group in the hospital called the Patient Experience Team. And basically, they're like an ombudsman. And they will work with the family to facilitate conversations with medical professionals. So the first thing I did was I said to my ombudsman, I want a team meeting. I want every specialty in the room. Everyone. Pain management, neurology, neurosurgery, infectious disease, everybody, physical therapy, everybody's got to be in the room because we got to come up with a plan. And here I was, a non-medical professional, a spouse, with my list in my book, my little steno pad of all the points. And I led the meeting and I went around the room by specialty saying, what's your diagnosis? What's your treatment plan? What's your prognosis? Going around. So that helped, definitely.
Not everyone could have done that, though.
What?
Not everyone could have done that.
No, I mean, I will tell you that somebody who does not have the understanding of medical terminology, it's overwhelming. And I'm very, I'm just very well read about it.
You've also been a practicing attorney for a long time. You
I've
know how to
also
get
been a
shit
practicing
done.
attorney for a long time, although I don't really deal with medical issues in my practice. But it also happens that now our daughter works in a medical school library. So librarian.
It helps. It helps.
It helps. So I can ask her to print out studies. Throughout this period of time, throughout this 5-month period of hospitalization, every week there was a different internal medicine doctor assigned to Perry. So the second neurologist then said to me, "Oh, I'm rotating off. You'll have somebody new." So now I've met 3 neurologists. So I decided I no longer want to, I can't remember their names. I just number them. Neurologist number 1, 2, 3. We got up to neurologist number 6. And every time we had a new neurologist, I had to educate them about what was happening. The most frustrating was the last one, where Perry ended up having another procedure under general anesthesia, which again threw him into a myasthenia gravis crisis. And because this neurologist was seeing him on the day he saw him for the first time, he was 4 days out from this procedure, and he was in the myasthenia gravis crisis. And the doctor said to me, "Well, this is like hospital neuralgia or something. He's just weak because he's been in the hospital so long." I said, "No." And it took me 2 days to convince this doctor that this was a myasthenia gravis crisis triggered by what I perceived to be the general anesthesia, and that he needed what they call plasmapheresis treatment to get him out of crisis. And finally, on the 3rd day, this doctor relented. I think he just gave up because he didn't want to hear me anymore. And lo and behold, after 2 treatments, Perry started to respond and started to get better. And of course, this doctor never came back and said, "Gee, Miss Weingart, you were right. You know, you were right on this. You called it." But be that as it may. So throughout this period of time, I am periodically dealing with my ombudsman to call team meetings again, to get one doctor to talk to another doctor, to get definitive diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment plan. And because it's a rotating staff, I was constantly educating people. I was constantly educating them about what was happening and what wasn't happening and what he was responding to and what he wasn't responding to. And the level of frustration is overwhelming. I mean, I would just leave at the hospital at night and every muscle in my body was tense, because I was, even though as a lawyer, I do a lot of arguing for my work, I was tired of arguing.
Sure.
I was tired of arguing with what I perceived to be the establishment. I was tired of fighting this uphill battle, trying to get him.
The system. I mean,
the system.
This
Correct.
We're going to get to the system failure, and I'm going to actually ask you to, if you could design your own system, what would it look like? So this is clearly an area where The system absolutely failed.
Absolutely failed.
Before we go to the system, if this were a job, right? If this were your full-time job and you had to write the job description for who you became overnight through this rupture,
Hmm.
what would it say?
It would say, provide, individual must be capable of providing unending emotional support to the patient, unending advocacy for the patient, um, you know, in a way, being able to leap tall buildings with a single bound, because you're constantly navigating roadblocks. Everything is like, well, he's got a bed sore. So I asked internal medicine, how do you treat that? Well, that's up to wound care. Wound care says, oh, pain management has to weigh in on how we're going to treat the pain associated with this. So now you got to you're navigating three subspecialties. So it's empathy, sympathy, advocacy. I think those are the sort of the three main ingredients that you would have to put into this kind of job description. And
And
selflessness.
unpaid.
Unpaid.
For all of
This is
that.
all
Unpaid.
this is all on a volunteer basis.
Right.
And I said at one point, I said to I think it was neurologist number 4 and neurologist number 5, I can't remember. I know I said it to internist number 3. Oh, I numbered the internist too. I said, look, his warranty is expired. I can't even return him to Costco and they'll take back anything. And it was having a dark sense of humor helped.
It helps a lot.
It definitely helped. And it was, I think that kind of kept me sane a little bit,
So you throw that in the job description, that some gallows humor?
Gallows humor, yes, exactly.
Would be a real benefit.
Right.
Well,
you really have to be able to see the dark side.
Right. And as the Marines say, I kind of embrace the suck. What did you learn about your own limits and your own sort of caregiving threshold, which is something you and I have talked about in a completely different context that we can get to in a second. But what about your own limits? What did you learn?
Well, you see I'm wearing 2 necklaces with like different colored beads here, right?
Yep.
Okay. They're actually, I'm told by the website from which I ordered them, that they're Morse code.
Oh.
And they're basically custom. I sent in what I wanted to say in Morse code. And one says, you are stronger than you know. And the other one says, resilience is my superpower. And I think that kind of sums it up.
Yeah.
I found a level of resilience that I didn't think existed in me, right? And I ordered these sort of in the middle of all of this chaos because I thought, well, how brilliant is this as a way to remind myself, constantly.
Whatever works.
Right. Now, does it say it in Morse code? I don't.
Well, you believe that it does.
I believe it. So that's all that counts.
Were you aware that you had a sort of like a threshold that you were capable of doing a tremendous amount of caregiving? Like, was that something you knew about yourself?
Well, I've always been sort of the empathetic one and the sympathetic one, the person who will, always lend the helping hand. I mean, that's always been my nature, right? listening to people, supporting people, providing guidance when asked, providing guidance when I'm not asked, providing guidance when it's none of my business.
Don't ever change.
Right. Um, but I have to say, I thought the first round in 2023 tested my limits, but this pushed me beyond those limits in ways that I didn't know I was capable of, because it was there were days where I just willed myself out of bed. I willed myself out of bed. I could have slept till noon under the covers day after day, but I willed myself up and I drove to the hospital, and the valet parking guys knew my name and I knew their names and I knew about their families, and they asked about my husband every day. And it was, on the one hand, comforting that the valet guys knew my name. On the one hand, it was kind of frightening that the valet guys knew my name.
Yeah.
So it, again, gallows humor.
But just knowing you as long as I do, I knew you actually had a high threshold for caregiving.
Yes.
I mean, and I can say that because I have the perspective of my low threshold for caregiving, which is, I think, something you might have
Right.
noticed in college.
Right.
Right, a boyfriend would
yes.
call.
I will never forget this, actually. I'm glad you said college, because and here's the juxtaposition, right, between you and me. Wendy Lurie gets a call from her then boyfriend telling her, "Oh, I'm not feeling well. I feel so sick. I don't know what I'm going to do." And Wendy says, "Oh, why don't you just call me when you feel better?"
I'm not proud, but it's true.
I mean, yeah. Now, if it had been me, I would have been there with chicken soup and tea, you know.
I know.
It it it's just, people are cut from different cloths. I mean, and you know, you and I don't think if I'm oversharing, I apologize, but you have a limited bandwidth even for your own medical and health scenarios, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, for example, how you have weathered the storm of the TBI and finding ways to cope and accommodate the limitations that you have now. I didn't know that I had the coping mechanisms that I ended up exhibiting in the last 5 months.
Right.
I pulled it out from somewhere, I don't know where.
Yeah.
It
But
just,
knowing you as long as I do, I can tell you it was always there.
right,
It was absolutely always there. All right, now let's talk a little bit more specifically about this idea of systems failure, right? Because you have just at every turn, that's what you have been faced with. So, which one failed fastest? Was it medical? Was it governmental benefits? Was it social, emotional, legal? Like, where was the first thing that just you said, "Oh my God, this does not work"?
That's a really good question. Really good question. And I have to say, the medical system. The medical system is everything about the way doctors practice medicine now. It's all about defensive medicine. Everything is defensive. Everything is, they do what they need to do to cover their butts, make sure they're not going to get sued, hedge any news that they're giving you. I just to digress for 1 second, remember when I said neurologist number 1 wanted to rule out other motor neuron diseases? So finally, I said to, I don't know, neurologist number 3 probably, I said, what do you mean by other motor neuron diseases? And he said, he hesitated. There was silence in the room. And he said, well, that typically refers to ALS.
Ah.
And I said, is that what we're dealing with here? Because if that's what we're dealing with here, we need to have a completely different conversation. And I said, I understand. That's a terminal illness. Myasthenia gravis is an autoimmune disease. People live with it. And he wouldn't commit at that point. He just wouldn't commit. Now, ultimately, the testing came back positive for myasthenia gravis, but at that point, we didn't know that.
Right.
And it was just circle speak, just talking around.
Yeah.
The fact that the specialties don't really talk to each other was a source of endless frustration. The fact that I would ask for a doctor to call me and they would call, and the expectation was that I would drop whatever I was doing or whoever I was talking to and talk to them, because that's when they had 5 minutes. Instead of saying, can I call you at 4? Or can we talk at 3? What's a good time for you? It's never about what works for the family. It's never about what works for the patient. It's about what works for them and what works for the system. Because they're answering to, a big, this was a big teaching hospital. I mean, this is a really good hospital. I mean, ultimately, the actual care that he got on a day-to-day basis was good, and I owe that to the nursing staff. And if there's any unsung hero in all of this, it's the nursing staff. Everything is about covering their butts. That's all it is. Doing tests, agreeing to do a treatment plan because the spouse is insisting on it, right? It's all about making sure that they have a bulletproof vest on. Right. You can't touch them. Right. That's it. Right. That, and it's at every level.
All right, I'm going to give you the magic whiteboard in a minute. And the magic whiteboard will allow you to fix any system that you want. And I'll give it to you in a minute, but I want to, the medical system is what failed you for a lot of people. What fails them when they're thrust into a caregiving role is the workplace system, right? Now, you said before, you're fortunate, right? You can work remotely. Your boss is super understanding. That's great. I have some data on this too, which is it's also from AARP. Half of working caregivers report making changes to their work schedules. Half.
Yes.
Almost a third take a leave of absence. More than a quarter move from full-time to part-time. Right. And 80% of workers who have access to flexibility take advantage of it. Correct. So the workplace doesn't work for people in caregiving situations.
You can't, there's no way to actually balance the two. If I worked for any other company, I would have been told to take paid family leave or FMLA and unpaid leave, and I would not have had as I say, the grace to be able to work remotely for 5 months.
Yeah.
Today is actually my first day back in the office.
Wow.
I left on July 21st, and today is my first day back. December 1st.
Wow.
And now I worked through that whole period. I was accessible. I was available. I'm the only lawyer in this company, so I have to make myself available. But the fact that my boss didn't say to me, Wendy, you have to get back to the office, is amazing to me. And we, because of the nature of our business, we're a social service company. We worked in the office through COVID. We did not work from home for, a year and a half during the pandemic, unlike everybody else. We were the only people in our office building at one point. So, I mean, I don't know that there's a way to fix that part of the system. If you don't have somebody like I do who said, do what you need, family comes first. Now we have paid family leave in New York, which is great. But that's only 12 weeks.
Right.
I think it's only 12 weeks, right?
Right.
And then you have, unpaid family leave, but a lot of companies make those run at the same time.
Right.
So you can't tack on unpaid leave after your paid leave.
Okay, so they run simultaneously.
They run simultaneously. They don't run consecutively.
That's another system failure.
Imagine somebody who is working a mid-level management job, right? Having to take 3 months without pay. I mean, most people can't do it.
No, they can't.
Most people, especially in New York, most people live paycheck to paycheck. Even the well-compensated people. So and if you're not in the hospital, if you're not sitting at bedside, that's when things go down the rabbit hole. That's when, they ignore the patient, or now I praise the nurses because they are great, but they all have this habit when you ring the bell of coming in and saying, I'll be back in a minute. And 25 minutes go by because they got involved in another task. You can't blame them, but they can only be in one place at one time. But that was a never-ending source of frustration for my husband. Especially because he needed so much help. I mean, he couldn't even turn in the bed by himself, right? So, and that's just, they're overworked. They have too many patients to care for on the floor, right?
And that's a systemic failure too.
It's a systemic failure. And the ratio is, whatever basically the law will allow, right?
Right.
Except when you're in the ICU, it's each nurse has 2 patients.
Right, so, they have to reach that level.
Right, but now you're in ICU.
Right.
Right, you're critically ill.
Yeah, I'm going to ask this question in a different way. I'm going to borrow an old marketing trope here.
Ooh.
Perception versus reality.
Okay.
What is the perception of caregiving versus what is the reality? How big is the gap?
Oh, it's huge. It's as big as like the Grand Canyon or bigger. I mean, I think the perception is that you're coming to the hospital and you're bringing flowers or sitting by the bedside for 20 minutes or an hour at a time.
Fluffing pillows,
exactly. Adjusting pillows. Whereas the reality of it is, I'm I'm going down the hall and getting a pillowcase because the pillowcase on the pillow is dirty and it has to be changed. And I'm not going to wait for the patient care associate to come in and change the pillow. So now I'm changing bedding, right? You know, I'm not, so the reality of it is, it's like hard labor. It's, you know, I'm, you know, I'm taking care of things that, it's not just sitting by my husband's side and holding his hand and saying, "Oh, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. We're going to get through this." Yeah, that's part of it. And it's hard to keep up my emotional outlook. It's hard for me to be optimistic, right? And because he's so pessimistic, he's like, "Oh, I'm never going to get out of this bed. I'm never going to be able to, be strong enough to walk again." So I become, so now I'm caregiver and cheerleader,
An advocate.
an advocate, and, interpreter, because now it's like, they're telling me one thing and they're, doing something else. So now I'm going back to the other specialty. It's,
And the wage earner
and
and
each
running
earner,
the home.
and, as they say, chief cook and bottle washer,
Yeah.
and managing, we have an adult daughter, but managing her anxiety around this. It's very hard to see a parent this vulnerable. Very, very hard, as you and I both know. And we were a lot older when our respective parents went through medical issues. Managing that, dealing with, I think I said this earlier, right? Everybody tries to be helpful, but telling me over and over again, "I don't know how you do this," is not helpful. It's not helpful.
Right.
It's like, "I'm so worried about you."
Right.
That's not helpful,
No.
right? I would talk to a friend and they would say, "Oh, what's going on with Perry?" And I would give this 2-second update, and I would change that topic as soon as I could, because I didn't want to talk about him.
I
I
remember.
wanted to talk about something else.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about what's going on in your work life, or your home life, or with your kids, or with your grandchildren, or whatever it is. I want to talk about something else. I don't
Anything
want
else.
to talk about this anymore.
Yeah.
I am up to here. And it took a while for some of my friends to understand that, but then eventually I think most of them got there. And it was, even you and I, when we would talk,
you would get off the topic right away.
I would turn it around and say, "What's going on with you?"
Yes. Every time.
Right?
Yep.
Because it was a distraction, because it made me not think about myself and what was going on and the stress I was under. It was a distraction. Yeah. And also, knitting and needlepoint are a distraction.
Yeah.
You bake, I knit, and I needlepoint. That's our coping mechanisms.
Okay, so now let's look beyond
Together
knitting.
we could be Little House on the Prairie.
We could be Little House on the Prairie. We have enough snow here. Let's get beyond our little coping mechanisms and take out the magic whiteboard, okay? So you can fix what's wrong. You can build something new. You can just break what exists, but just pick a couple of the things that were, we'll use the work language, right? The biggest pain points for you.
The biggest pain point for me was really the lack of communication in the hospital and the frustration I felt. So if I had a magic whiteboard, I would say, first of all, there has to be more continuity. And now I don't know if every hospital operated the way this hospital did with rotating specialists. And it turned out that the neurologists weren't really in-house doctors. They had outside practices, and they just covered the hospital for a week at a time. And that's why there was such a rotation. In my view, if you're in the hospital for 3 days, it doesn't matter to you because you're seeing the same doctor in the 3 days. When you're in the hospital for 3 months, it matters a lot.
Yeah.
And the lack of continuity was the single biggest source of frustration for me. So I would change that. If I could change anything, I would change how they, if they could be fluid enough to staff a patient who's a long-term patient in a way, maybe outside the box. Okay, you want to have rotating neurologists everywhere else? That's fine. But when you've got somebody who's been in the hospital for 6 weeks already with a neurological condition, let neurologists too take the lead and be there and check in, even if they're not checking in every day. I'd rather have them skip 3 days than have to educate somebody new. If once he's assigned to internal medicine, don't give me a new internal medicine doctor every week, where they hand off Sunday to Sunday. Let that doctor follow this patient until he's discharged. Because that's, first of all, they see progression, right? Where if you're rotating, they don't see the progression. Because one of the things I said, I remember saying to one of the neurologists, this is not his baseline. His baseline last week was XYZ. What you're seeing is ABC, and it's not his baseline. This represents a regression. And that was, I think, the biggest source of frustration. Because I had the ability to work remotely and from home and from the hospital, I didn't have to deal with the challenges of work, but I suspect that the vast majority of people, that's a significant pain point. How do you juggle a job and your family? How do you have enough bandwidth to do your work and do it correctly, right? Because I'm not making widgets here, right? Mm-hmm. And be there for your loved one who can't advocate for themselves. I mean, when Perry was intubated, we gave him a whiteboard. Speaking of whiteboards, we gave him a whiteboard, but he could barely hold the pen, right? I had to be his voice. I had to be his advocate. Mm-hmm. And that's a heavy burden. And then you have to have tough discussions. You have to have those healthcare proxy discussions and those living will discussions that maybe you've been putting off for years and years and years because you don't want to talk about them, right? Right. But now you're in a situation where you have to talk about it because you ain't got a choice. And that was very scary. Yeah. That was really, really, really scary. Having to have those, that was really emotional, having those conversations. So I think for me, it was the medical system. That was the biggest pain point. That by far and away.
And small measure of good news in that. Yes. Small measure, which is that in BestGuessistan, obviously we have a ministry of caregiving, which you are uniquely suited to lead.
Oh God, yes.
It's been newly named. It's the Ministry of Invisible Work.
Yes.
Does that feel right?
That is spot on. Invisible work. It covers it because you're just, it's like ignore that man behind the curtain, right? From Wizard of Oz. It's like nobody sees you doing what you're doing, and somehow it all gets done. It's, I used to say to the ombudsman I was dealing with, I said, people are either very scared of you or you have a magic wand. And because if I said to him, I need to talk to X, 20 minutes later, X was calling me or X was at the bedside. But if I had asked the nurse 5 times, I need to talk to X, I didn't hear from them.
Right.
So people were either very scared or he had a magic wand.
Or maybe a little bit of
both. Right. But I like the Ministry of Invisible Work because it captures everything beautifully.
Well, okay, so just so you know what's ahead, there will be paperwork on its way to you.
Okay.
It will be confounding and confusing because things in BestGuessistan are not perfect.
No.
But the good news is there'll be no wrong answers.
Right. Everything. Right. Because
BestGuessistan. Will you come back again when you're further down in this process and when Perry's home from rehab?
I would love to. I would love to. If you'll have me again, I would love to come back.
Really interested in how this develops,
right,
and how you cope. I mean, you obviously have great coping mechanisms. I think it's really inspiring for our listeners and for other people.
Thank you. I would, if you'll have me, I would love to come back because it's a journey. It's a journey. So
it breaks my heart that you have to go through it. It really does. But I really appreciate the time and the perspective and the honesty. This was incredible. Thank you.
Thank you, because for bringing a voice to a worldview that very few people see. You know, people don't see the rupture. They don't. I mean, for you with a TBI, looking at you, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. It's you're not walking with a cane or, you know, I wouldn't know. How would I know?
You wouldn't. And invisible disability is actually a topic we're going to be tackling on another one of these dispatches.
Exactly.
For exactly that reason.
Exactly. Right. The Ministry of Invisible Work. I'm there.
All right. It is done. So let it be written. So let it be said.
Yes.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you for listening to this episode of BestGuessistan. I'm Wendy Lurie. Today's episode explored the rupture of caregiving and featured Wendy Weingart. If this episode resonated with you, or if you know someone living with the unseen work of caregiving, please consider sharing the episode with them so they may find their way to our community. And if this resonated with you, please subscribe, like, rate, or join our community at bestguessistan.com. See you next time. And remember, in BestGuessistan, there are no wrong answers.